Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Joseph Butler and his world-renowned book, The Analogy of Religion, first published in 1736, although we are working off of a 1906 copy. And we're going to take a look at pages 22 to page 42, and we're going to look at basically the movement of the providence of righteousness. So before we get started, let's take a look at the column 4, and I've got a little inserted triad up there that'll give us a framework that kind of shapes the entire lesson. And the movement of righteousness consists of humanity possessing subjective capacities to foresee the consequences of any positive action, coupled with the objective divine administration through the providence of general laws, and that will result, those two together do result in the movement of the rule of distributed justice, which is righteousness. The movement of the rule of distributed justice is what Joseph Butler calls the movement of righteousness. Let's begin with block 1. Let's take a look at that subjective capacity that the self possesses, the reflective state of reflection as a subjective capacity. And Butler says that everything that we enjoy and suffer is put within our own power. We are confronted by the consequences of actions. We are aware of and confronted by the probability of consequences of our actions. We are empowered through our living capacities to foresee these consequences, and our exertion to obtain, or our positing of action, results in either enjoyment or suffering. So every positive action will result either in enjoyment or in suffering. And ungoverned positive actions result in suffering. But we do have the option of being informed before we posit an action, and we know through instruction, through example, and through the experience that we live and confront. All of that influences our determination of probable consequences. But he does say that divine goodness may not be considered a singular disposition of benevolence. The divine future end may be beyond our reach of our faculties, but there is a general divine administration that is accessible to our state of reflection. That's key here. It's at the level of natural religion now, or phenomenology. There is a general divine administration taking place in reality that we have access to observing and understanding through our state of reflection, our capacity of the state of reflection. So if you look at 9, the general divine administration gives the self the capacity to foresee the consequences of an action, and it can be ascribed to the general course of nature, and that will exhibit the attributes of uniformity and constancy. So we can perceive in our historical reality the glimpses or intimations of the movement of righteousness as uniformity of virtue and constancy of the movement of righteousness. And we perceive it through giving attention to our state of reflection. The human response to the divine administration has one of two possibilities. We either practice avoidance of evil or attainment of good. And foreknowledge of consequence becomes the way we receive the ethical imperatives of the divine administration. Through knowing, through knowledge or gnosis of consequence. So if you look at 10, therefore, we got our little summary here. We have exertion of intent. The self acts in order to obtain objects of enjoyment, but ungoverned exertion results in suffering. Then 2, knowing takes place through instruction, example, and experience, which informs our posited self-exertion action. And then 3, general divine administration is the goal of our posited action, our informed exertion. It is our participation in the uniformity and the constancy of divine providence or divine administration, where we have a foreknowledge of consequences which become the ethical imperative that is imprinted in our hearts as conviction. So we begin with a discussion of the state of reflection that we possess as intelligent selves, and that is our contribution toward the movement of righteousness. But now we need to look at the objective side in block 2, which is the divine wisdom, which becomes the natural guide. Again, we always begin with phenomenology because we've already discussed this in the introduction, but Joseph Butler proceeds through phenomenology and an analogy out of phenomenology to draw conclusions concerning revealed religion. So he takes the method, or what he called the way of analogy. And the way of analogy is another way of saying the way of phenomenology. In today's philosophical culture, we would call that the way of phenomenology. He begins with phenomena, and then through analogous reflective work, he posits axioms and notions of revealed religion. Now in block 2, foreknowledge of the passions for pleasure and suffering equals the divine administration acting upon us. The administration is posited even before any consideration of divine attributes. Therefore, even the natural course of things, we're just remaining again in phenomenology here, the natural course of things supports the notion of divine reward and punishment. So let's take a look at B there, the foreknowledge of divine imprint. The administration of nature implies rewarding and punishing. A great deal of suffering is attributed to that which man brings upon himself. Sufferings are often delayed from the actual event that caused them. Misery always follows in an appointed time. God governs the world through general laws, natural general laws, which equal his divine providence. So again, divine providence can be ascertained at the level of phenomenology for Joseph Butler as general laws. Now, religious future punishment is analogous to the providence of natural laws. So again, through the reflective work of analogy, we can posit a revealed religion future punishment and reward scenario. Now, wisdom in Scripture is introduced as the natural appointed guide of human life, again at the level of the phenomenology or the level of the natural. Therefore, our little summary. 1. Foreknowledge of consequences equals the imprint of divine administration upon our minds and upon our lives. 2. Concepts of divine reward and divine punishment may be analogously posited. So through analogous reflective work, we posit the concepts of divine reward and divine punishment. And 3. Appointed times becomes a posited notion made for the consequences of divine administration, which is enclosed within a system of general laws that point as signs to future state. So these general laws are still enclosed within divine providence, even though they are natural general laws. They're enclosed within divine providence for Joseph Butler through the reflective work of analogy, through the reflective state, the self-reflective state that uses the workspace of analogy to draw these posited notions for revealed religion. So we have a subjective capacity for truly being able to recognize consequences, and we have an objective administration of providence, which is reflectively gained through analogy. And that brings us to the movement of righteousness in Block 3. Subjective capacity and objective administration equal movement of divine righteousness. We begin with universality. Divine administration abbreviates every particular human positing. The self is guided by sense and reason. Natural administration implies an intelligent maker. The concept of rewarding may be posited for the divine administration. So again, through the work of analogy, we can posit the concept of divine rewarding. So rewarding as a concept. Note 2. Moral administration does not equal simple absolute benevolence. Within experience, there are intimations of righteous government, and through these intimations we acquire subjective apprehensions that it will be eschatologically fulfilled, or a teleosis of completion will take place. Religion takes up the role of presenting and the role of positing the degrees of perfection that need actualization, and the self is to strive toward desiring a satisfaction of reasonableness and virtue. And Butler says we need to take up attentive inquiry. God governs through rewards and punishments and rules of distributed justice. The rule of distributed justice. Religion is to raise expectation for righteousness in humanity. So for our little summary, if you take a look at note 4 there, we begin with a universal rule. Administrative righteousness abbreviates all of humanity's posited actions. 2, the analogy of consequence leads to positing the concept of rewarding for God's administration. And 3, attentive inquiry identifies administration of righteousness through what we determine as the rule of distributed justice. And then 4, religion is to raise up expectation and hope within humanity. So now we can come back to the top of column 4 again, where we began, and now it'll make more sense to you. But here's that summary triad. We couple together subjective capacities to foresee the consequences of positive action with the objective administration of the providence of the general laws that are put in place by the divine. Those two together make up the movement of the rule of distributed justice, which is righteousness. The movement of the rule of distributed justice equals Dikaiosune righteousness for Joseph Butler. Dikaiosune righteousness is a movement, an eschatological movement of the rule of distributed justice. So that triad makes more sense to us now. So let's take a look at column 4, which is going to discuss this movement of righteousness even more. In number 1, we begin with a subjective reflection. The self possesses a capacity for reflection, and this leads to recognizing the probability of consequences. We also perceive that vicious actions are punished as mischievous to society. The fear of consequence is a punishment in itself. Now, on the objective side, we have objective instrumentality. Providence is carried out through the instrumentality of man. The positive action by humanity is either virtue or vicious. Enjoyment is the abstract concept derived from the virtuous act. And then we take a look at note 3, virtuous act and advantage. The immediate effects are printed in the mind of our positive action. The vicious act and uneasiness. Every vicious act results in being in a state of remorse. There's a sense of being blameworthy. But security, peace, and open mind are the consequences of the virtuous act. Security, peace, and open mind. And then he does want to take up the positing of a future punishment and a future reward. If you look at note 4 there is within society a tendency to give regard to character. The community also posits a regard for others. there are three visible concretions of the movement of righteousness: domestic government, civil government, and moral government. In other words, family, civil precepts of civil government, and the moral government of divine providence that encloses domestic government and civil government. Those are your three concretions of the movement of righteousness, according to Joseph Butler. But if you just take a look at that little inserted diagram at the top of column 4, that is going to be the little recall triad that you'll want for the lesson. And it gives us an analogy of the structure of being and how we really do understand that Joseph Butler is a phenomenologist. He begins with phenomenology, he begins with the natural, and moves through the workspace of analogy to posit notions of revealed religion. So that's going to wrap up this lesson. We'll pick up next time on page 43.